All right, so fun fact, you guys get to be stuck with me the whole time. Like I said, Pastor Kevin and Brandy are out of town, and we are so glad that you have joined us this morning. So I am going to be doing something a little bit different today. I am going to be sharing a little bit about myself, my testimony, where I come from, my heart for ministry, and all of that kind of stuff, because I know I've gotten a couple of questions of, how did you come to be here? And how did you come to be a part of our church? And so I just wanted to kind of give you the pre backstory that happened long ago. So Wesley put this picture up there. This is actually a picture of my family. I have had the opportunity of being a part of this family for the last 16 years. I'll kind of go through them really quick. So obviously I'm on the left, and then you have my brother Luke. He is 10 years old. My brother John, Eugene Hisel the fourth, he is 12 years old now. My mom, Chandra, she is holding my 18-month-old little sister, Hope. And then that's my dad, John. So yes, they're young. Yes, I do have a 1-year-old sister. And yes, I am 29 years old, so it's a little bit weird. And so our family is great. I love them to death, and I would not change what has gone on in my life for the world. However, like I said, I have only been with them for the last 16 years. So my story starts a little bit before that. So before that, it began about 29 years ago in a hospital room. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to tell you that part of it. But I will say that I biologically have 4 older sisters. I'm the youngest of 5. I have 3 half-sisters and 1 full biological sister. My biological mom, my biological dad, they divorced when I was really little, and yes, it kind of matters. My mom remarried when I was 7, and she is still to this day with my stepdad, which is great. However, life did not go as we thought we would have life go. They ended up getting into drugs, unfortunately, and they were selling them and using them, and so it was a little bit tricky. Thankfully, when I was in 6th grade, I was about, 11 years old. One of my neighborhood friends down the road, she invited me to a church, and I didn't really have any interest in going to church. I was like, why would I go to something like that? It sounds really boring. But turns out it was a youth outreach, and there were probably, I would say, between 75 to 100 students at this outreach. There were bounce houses, there was pizza, all of the fun things to get a teenager to go to an event. And so I went and got to experience worship music for the first time. My now dad was actually the youth pastor of that youth group back then, and also led worship and did all the things. So I got to experience a lot all in one. And so I gave my life to Christ in August of 2008, and it just changed my life. Little did I know that me doing that before I went into foster care and had to deal with all of the things that I had going on would be God's way of absolutely shaping my entire life to put me here today and go through all of the hardships. I did have to go through them all. But he was faithful, and he worked with me through all of that. And so if you would have asked me back then, when I was little 11-year-old, that I'd be public speaking, I didn't do that. That was not my thing. I was like the other Kristina. It was like my arch nemesis. And I would be in a church 2 hours away from my family. I would tell you that you're crazy. But as it turns out, sometimes God has different plans for us than we anticipate. We have our own road, and sometimes God's road just kind of goes a little bit differently, and that's okay. So going back to kind of how I ended up with this amazing family, I was actually not even at my mom's house. I was at a friend's house at a birthday party, and I got a phone call while I was there that said that my mom was going to jail and that they were coming to pick me up and take me somewhere I didn't know where I was going. And I was like, huh? I just talked to my mom 3 hours ago, and so They all told the story. I honestly knew that they were doing drugs, but what am I going to do at 11 years old? Am I going to really turn my own mom in and get taken out of my own home? No, I did not. My sister, on the other hand, did. I believe it was some sort of silly thing about not wanting to do the dishes after she got her nails done or something. She's a character, actually. Love her to death, but anywho. So we ended up at the Family Justice Center. It was after hours. We were just sitting there. She was bawling her eyes out. I was just sitting there, and she kind of looked at me and was like, why are you just sitting there? And I said, well, this isn't my fault. I didn't call them. And also, I'm not surprised. And she's like, well, you have such a heart of stone. Like, how could you not be crying about something like this? And I was like, it just is what it is. Like, this is life. We'll go to a new home, and then maybe we'll go home one day, maybe not. And she was so mad at me. But I think that God had been preparing me previously. I kept going to youth every week, even when I was in foster care. That was like the staple that I had in my life. And I think that if I had not chosen to give my life to Christ, and I had not chosen that youth group with those people, quite literally, they wouldn't be my parents today, and I wouldn't have the life that I have today. But I was very blessed, too, to not be a general statistic, I would say, for a foster child. I'm now a social worker, and so I know a lot of the statistics. But on average, every foster kid usually has between 4 and 5, on average, foster homes that they are in throughout their stay, depending on the length of the stay and all sorts of things. But I was very grateful that I only had one. And I also think that that was God's way of protecting me from a lot of different things that could be happening in the world. However, my sister was not as fortunate. She's about 3.5 years older than I am. And so, needless to say, teenagers can be pretty bossy sometimes. Nick and Kristina know that very well. And so she oftentimes would just boss my foster family around and tell them to take her places and try to boss me around, and it didn't work out. And so I was faced in foster care with my first big decision. I didn't know what I was supposed to do, but my foster mom sat me down, and she said, we love having you around. You fit in very well with our daughters. I was kind of right in between the girls' age of their biological daughters, but my sister was older than both of them. And I got sat down and told that it probably wasn't going to work out for my sister to stay in this home. And I probably should have been heartbroken, but I wasn't. Like I said, my sister was bossy, and she had been my whole life. And I was like, well, I don't want to get punished for her decisions. And so they said, if you would like to go with her as stay with a sibling group, then absolutely you're welcome to do that. If you would like to stay with us, you're also welcome to do that because we love having you around. And so I said, okay, well, I'm not going to punish myself for her decisions, so I'm going to stay here and she can go wherever she needs to go. And with her decisions and stuff, I think she ended up in 9 foster homes until she aged out, but that was very much like she was stealing stuff from them and all sorts of things. So I would have been bounced around another 9 times if I had chosen to stick with my sister, who I thought, maybe it was a good idea, maybe not. But like I said, God has other plans. And I ended up in my foster home without my sister. And I was a little nervous at first because then I was in a house with somewhat strangers. It had been a couple of months, but it was still a little bit tricky. But again, God knows. God knows the ways that He has for us, and I didn't quite see it at 12 years old because, well, as a 12-year-old, who has to decide the fate of their entire future? Usually. Not very many 12-year-olds, at least that I know of. And so going back to my youth group, I was lucky enough to be able to continue on with my youth group. I was spending time with my pastors. I was getting to know them. I was, getting to know Chandra, Pastor John's wife, and she was funny, and she was young, and she was hip, and all those things. And so I had a foundation and a family in that church. And then there was one night that kind of shattered me for a few minutes, and they had told me that God was calling them to a different church. And that broke my heart because I was like, these are the 2 people who have been constant since before I was in foster care to now, and now I'm losing that. I don't have anybody who's going to like know who I am and what I need. But thankfully, after that night was done, my mom was like, well, okay, she wasn't my mom then, but she is now, so it's weird. She was kind of talking to me about how, they would like to continue spending time with me and getting to know me and everything. And I was like, well, how is that going to work? You're not at the church anymore. And I got kind of sassy. And she's like, well, as it turns out, like, we have cars and we can come get you and all these things. And so it was kind of weird because I only knew this church since I, was kind of a little baby Christian, I guess you could say. And then, like, these people were not going to be at the church that I was going to. So I was like, I don't know if I'm going to keep going to this church. How am I going to get to another church? But little did I know, again, bird's eye view now, hindsight's 2020. God was setting up every specific road map. Like, he had every exit figured out. Every time I had to go do something, I was like, why am I doing this? Again, I'm like 12 years old, and I'm like, I don't even know what's going on. I don't know what way's up, what way's down, where I'm going to live tomorrow, because technically I could be moved at any time. And yet, I just had this thought in the back of my mind that if I stick with these people, everything will be okay. And so I hung out with them. I got to know them. I got to know their dogs. And, they didn't have any kids because my mom was, at the time, I think 27, I think she was 28 officially when they adopted me. But they were young. They had just been married for about a year and a half. And let me just tell you, everybody tells them, oh, it's such a great idea. You have a teenager before you have babies, and then you have a babysitter. However, those years were not super easy because I was a teenager, So, anywho, I started spending more time with John and Chandra. My foster mom, her name is Mildred, and I love her dearly. She was a phenomenal part of my life. She would kind of joke around. She's like, they're going to adopt you, right? They're going to adopt you. And I was like, no, like, stop it. You don't know what you're talking about. And then there was this court date that, I was preparing for because foster care, there are a lot of court dates. And my biological mom, she had not been working the plan the case plan that they had asked her to work. And it was getting very frustrating because it got to the point where it was like, okay, well, I'm going to be in foster care for an eternity if this is going to be how, she's working the case plan. She'd go kind of one step forward, 6 steps back. So then it was like, okay, well, I'm not going anywhere, for the foreseeable future. And so it got to the point where multiple court dates of this happening, I was like, these people love me. I can tell they love me. They want what's best for me. They want, like, to be in my life. So I need to speak to my biological mom in court and ask them to terminate her rights. Like, this is what I want. Mind you, I think that no 12-year-old should have to make this decision ever. When I think back on all of the stuff that I decided when I was younger, I was like, I have no idea how I did that. Because even now, like, I see 12-year-olds and I'm like, no, be a kid. Like, go do, go play in the mud or something, like something crazy, But here I am deciding my future at 12 years old. And I remember the judge told me that I couldn't speak out in court because I was too young. I didn't know what I was talking about. And I was like, no, I know very well what I want, and I want to say it to my biological mom's face. And they said, you're too young, you can't do that. And I said, okay, well, how can I get my words spoken in court then? And I had an attorney at the time. They now have both attorneys and guardian ad litems for kids. You can kind of choose, I think, up until you're 12 or 13. But I had an attorney that was specifically representing my choices. And so I wrote a letter, and I had my attorney read it word for word in court, right in front of my biological mom, right in front of the judge. And the judge kind of looked at my attorney, I guess. I wasn't allowed in the room, so I don't even know. So this is just relayed information because they wouldn't even let us in the room back then, which I am grateful that it is no longer like that and children can speak in court. But this was back in 2009, 8? I can't remember exactly. A while ago. And so anyway, so after my attorney read my letter in court, my mom she was visibly upset, but she decided to voluntarily terminate her rights because she knew this is truly what I wanted. And that kind of started this whole snowball effect of, okay, my parents have been doing all these classes to get foster and adoption certified at the same time. I'm with, this one foster home who's great, love them, have a couple sisters, foster sisters and all these things. And church is fine. We're going to church, at a different church in Cuna. And I'm like, God, I'm not sure, what's going on. This is great. This is all well and good. But, is it going to get completely ripped away from me in an instant? Because at this time, I'm still in foster care. Nothing is set in stone. No papers have been signed, nothing. And so, I just began to journal because I have always been somebody who is much better at writing down my feelings and my thoughts and my prayers than verbally speaking them. And so I just began kind of a little prayer journal, and it was where I could be 100% raw with God. It was, sometimes I was really angry, and so I wrote some not super nice things. Other times there were teardrops on the page because I was so upset. But at the end of the day, I had that quiet time that I could spend with God. And I knew that no matter what the next day faced, I had that moment where I just felt at peace. And I knew that everything was going to be okay, regardless of what it was that had ended up happening. I knew it was going to be okay because I took the time. I spent time with the Lord. I didn't know what I was doing because I was a kid. So I just, kind of prayed, and sometimes I yelled and, the typical things that you do as teenagers regardless. And then there was one day that I remember very clearly. We had been hanging out at John and Chandra's house, and they sat me down at their kitchen table, and I felt like I was in trouble because, when people sit across from you and you're 12, you're like, I'm not sure what's going on. And they kind of just asked me, they said, hey, we really like spending time with you. We've really come to love you, and we just want to know, if you would be okay with us adopting you. I just kind of looked at them. I was like, huh? I don't know what you're talking about. And they're like, yeah, we want you to be our daughter. And I was like, oh, that. I was like, yeah, absolutely. I would love that, I, fit in very well with their family. And I had gone to the fair with them, and I met my dad's parents for the first time, and I still remember down to, what I was wearing that day. That was a very special day for me, just being accepted into this family before I was even a part of the family, before I had their last name, before, anything was official. They accepted me, and they loved me, and I was very grateful for that. And I didn't really know kind of how to process that. I was like, okay, can I have a little bit of time to kind of figure out, yes, I want this, but can I, I need time to process it, And then I kind of went up to the room that I would sleep in at their house, and I just, cried out to God, and I was like, God, is this your plan for me? I don't know. These people are wonderful, but they're young. Are they going to be able to handle a teenager? Is this what you have for me? And I just, again, that overwhelming peace I just felt in that moment, and I didn't know how to pray properly. There is no proper way to pray, I'll tell you that. It's literally just speaking to God. But when I was 12, I was like, there's a right way and there's a wrong way, and all of these big fancy words are not what are coming out of my mouth. I later learned that that's perfectly fine. It is literally just a conversation with the Father. But I didn't know what was going to happen. And so the process was not easy. It was not short. But it was God's plan for our family. And I moved in with John and Chandra spring break of my 7th grade year. I was 13 years old. And the adoption process took a little over a year. Very annoying at times. But eventually, we were able to get everything finalized on April 4th, 2011. And so that is when I officially became a Hisel. Really, I officially became Kristina Faith Hisel. because when I was adopted, this was my clean slate. This was my fresh start. I changed my entire name, first, middle, and last, and it represents my family, it represents my faith in God, and it represents the new start of my life. And that touched my heart in so many ways. Like I'm going to ask my mom, I spent probably months trying to figure out what I would make people call me. My mom was trying to I think it was my dad. He was trying to get people to call me Murgatroyd. And I told him, I said, under no circumstances am I changing my name to Murgatroyd. And he's like, but we can call you Little Murgy. And I was like, no, sorry, but that's not happening. So it was fun. It was serious sometimes, but, that's when things really started to kick off. We moved to Kuna, Idaho. My dad was the worship pastor there, and that's kind of really where my passion for worship really kicked off. I would sing with my dad. He taught me how to play bass when I was, I think, 17. It was a long process between being able to just play and then play and sing and then all the things. But we were at that church for about 12 and a half years. And it just became a little bit more special when not only was I getting to sing, because I loved to sing, but I got to do it with my dad. And I got to do it in a way where I was leading people into the presence of God. And that, to me, is the most special thing that can be done. And everyone was like, oh, you and your dad are so cute. Like, you guys get to sing together. And I was like, I mean, thank you. But again, it's not about us. We sounded well together because he raised me from when I was 14, or 13, really. But, it was just, I had a heart for it. He had a heart for it. He kind of taught me, and he helped mentor me. And yes, he was my father, but he was also like my favorite person. Not that he's not anymore. That sounded terrible. He's alive and he still is. But he became like my absolute favorite person. And so I had, been helping with worship, and I also ended up helping with youth group. And so I was, a youth leader, and I was helping with worship and youth, and I was helping with worship in the big service. And, it just became that ministry was just like all around me. I was just enveloped by this love of Christ and this love of helping people. And that is when I just decided, you know what, I have a heart for teenagers because of everything that happened to me while I was in youth group. And so I ended up going to college, and I was like, I'm going to help people. And so, at first, I was just going to go for ministry. I ended up going to Northwest Nazarene University, which there are some differences, and it became enough differences that I chose to then just pursue social work and, do my ministry with my church. And so I ended up graduating in 2019 with my bachelor's in social work. And I had, at this point, 2 little brothers. John 4 was born my sophomore year of high school, and Luke was born like a month before I started college in 2015. And so, life got really busy. But at the end of it, I kept reminding myself, I have my prayer journal. I need to write in my prayer journal. I need to read my Bible. And that was I would always tell my dad, I'm going upstairs and I'm going to do my quiet time. And he's like, all right, cool, see you when you get back. He knew what that meant to me. He knew how important it was to me. And he knew that I just needed moments. Even growing up in a great family, from the age of 13 to now, I needed that quiet time. I needed the time where I could just push away all of the chaos that 2 little boys bring to your life and just focus on my relationship with God and, diving in deeper to what he has for me. Sometimes I feel like I don't know the path. I don't know the ways that he has. Not that they aren't good and that they won't come to fruition, but it's harder to know, in the midst of, the busiest times of life. And one of the scriptures that I've always come back to, it's in Psalm 25. And in verse 4 and 5, it says, show me your ways, Lord, teach me your paths. Guide me in your truth and teach me, for you are God, my Savior, and my hope is in you all day long. I just remember over and over just praying that. Sometimes I would cry because I was as a teenager, I didn't know what was going on. As a young adult, I didn't know, what I was going to do after college and all of these things. But I was like, Lord, just show me your ways. I know that you are good. You are my Savior. You are my God. but just show me. And I knew that no matter what, it all worked out. Somehow it all worked out in the end, because that's how he works. We get to the end and we're like, oh, that's how God does things. Okay, that makes way more sense. And so now, I live 2 hours away from my family, and I go to visit for my great-grandma's 85th birthday a couple years ago, and then I look at my mom, and I was like, is there something you're not telling me? And she's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, well, you look a little different. And she works out all the time, so I could tell that she had a baby bump. And she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. She goes, I'm not pregnant. And I was like, okay, cool. I don't believe you, but, cool. And so that was, I think it was September 22nd or so of 23. And we were going to Hawaii that year for Thanksgiving, and I remember getting a call the day before her and my brothers left. My dad and I were there until the Monday after because I was helping him with some stuff at his church for his Thanksgiving feast. But I get a call the day before she leaves for Hawaii, and she goes, hey, do you remember when you were asking about some, changes to my body? And I was like, when did you find out? And she literally was like, well, I took a test this morning, didn't believe it, so I took another one. And I was like, okay, so how far along do you think you are? And she's like, I have no idea. And I was like, did me asking you in September, really not, get you to take one? And she's like, no. Well, it turned out she was 23 weeks along, and she was just finding out, and she still couldn't go to the doctor until she was 26 weeks along because we were going to be in Hawaii for that long. So, anywho, everything was healthy. My mom was healthy. My little sister, obviously, she's a little cutie pie. But it was hard for me. So when my brothers were born, it was difficult because I was the adopted kid, and they were biological kids. But then they were boys, and I was like, you know what? I can handle this. I'm still the only girl. However, when when my mom was pregnant with Hope, I was like, this is going to change everything. I thought that I was free and clear, Luke is 10. I was like, this is great. She's, in her early 40s. I'm not going to have to worry about this. Well, I had to kind of trust in the Lord a little extra over the last probably year and a half, coming to terms with the fact that I was going to have a little sister, and I was not going to be the only girl, and I was going to be the adopted daughter, and she was going to be a biological daughter. Does my family treat us that way? Absolutely not. I'm still their first daughter. I'm their oldest. That's that. But in my heart, it was really hard for me to understand that. And I was scared that, certain people in my family were going to see it as such. And I have been so blessed that that has not happened. I do feel really bad because now I have an 18-month-old sister that I don't get to see that often. And so I really only get to FaceTime her. And, if you see me dragging on a Sunday morning, oftentimes it is because I was in Boise until 11 o'clock in the evening or midnight visiting my family. I usually try to go about every other week or so to see them, but that's just because I love them and, they're a huge part of my life. But also, I don't think that I ever could have thought that, I would have 3 little siblings and amazing parents and amazing grandparents and aunts and uncles who would take me in like I was never not in their family, and everybody in my life, when they see me now, they see a pastor's kid. And so they just think that it's been, rainbows and butterflies my whole life. And then they get to know me, and they get to understand that, I'm the kid who started smoking weed when I was 9 because my parents did it. My parents did much worse, but, they understand that I am not, pristine as a person, as a Christian. Of course, I try my best, and I love the Lord, and I do my best to live for him, but I'm not this perfect little pastor's kid that people think that I am just because my parents are pastors. Now, have I been blessed by them? Absolutely. But there were struggles, too. We fought, my mom and I, we're very similar in personality, and so we butt heads a lot. And there was a lot of, you've never raised a teenager, you don't know what you're talking about, and a lot of, I was just a teenager not that long ago, so I know exactly what I'm talking about. And so, like, it was a lot. And so I felt like God was calling me to the Twin Falls area, to the Magic Valley, and so in 2021, I moved over to Twin Falls, and I was a youth leader at the church I was going to then, and then I felt like, after about a year or so, God had put it on my heart to go to another church. I played softball with them for a little bit, ended up there for 3 years or so, about 3 years, and in those 3 years, I became heavily involved. I was leading worship for youth. I was speaking in youth once or twice a month. I was helping lead worship on Sunday mornings. I was running a young adults group. I was doing so many things because I knew that I needed to be involved. I needed my church community. And so I did everything that I possibly could. And there was some hurts in that church. Not from the church, from the people in the church, because that's kind of usually where they come from. But I remember about the time that Hope was born, I was trying to find a new church. It was time for me to protect myself and get out of there. And so I was trying to find a new church home. And then Hope was born, and then I was in Boise about every weekend, at least. And so it was hard for me to do more than just go to my dad's church. My dad is now a senior pastor at a church in Boise and has been since September of 21. And so it's so easy to just go to where I'm comfortable. However, I always have to remember that there's not growth in comfortability. Growth comes when you are uncomfortable, when you are pushed past what you feel like you can handle. And I was like, okay, well, I'll do what I can. And so I talked to my dad, and I was like, I guess I should probably be home on the weekends, or at least on Sundays, so I could try to figure out, a church to go to. And I remember that I was looking for a church for about a year, a whole year of feeling like homeless, kind of, because having that church community is so deeply embedded and important to me that I felt homeless. And I remember I was in Boise for a late Christmas gathering on the 28th of December this last year. My aunt and uncle were in Iowa with his family for Christmas, so we went and got together. And I remember talking to him. I was like, I need to find a church, Dad. Like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I feel lost. And I said, I still, have my faith, of course. I still read my Bible. I do all these things. I feel like it should be happening by now. And he said, okay, well, have you gotten through what had happened at the last church? And I was like, honestly, there's still some hurt there, but, I feel like I've done a lot of work in a year. And so he was like, okay, well, here's the options that you were telling me about, because he let me do all of the research. I'm a big girl. He was like, didn't you want to try out Kevin and Brandy's church? And I was like, yeah, I don't know, I was like, it's in Jerome, and, it's not that it's not, it's not very far or whatever, but I was like, yeah, we'll see. And he's like, that's, the one that you haven't tried, and them. I went to school with Courtney, their daughter, when I was in 7th grade, before all of this happened. And so I've known them since I was really little. I just hadn't seen them for a long time. And so I remember I left at my grandparents' house where we had our little Christmas get together. I left my stocking bag there. I was in a hurry to get home. It was late. I was tired. And I was texting my parents about it that night, and I usually text them when I get home because it's 2 hours, and I'm oftentimes driving until 1:30 in the morning too. And so I texted them, hey, I'm home, blah, blah, blah. And my dad, he's a pastor, and as you can imagine, he does not usually text much in the mornings on Sundays because he's getting ready for church. And I just remember a text message that I had from him that morning when I woke up, and I was like, what in the world? And it was him answering my silly question about my bag of my stocking stuff. And then we have a group chat, my mom, my dad, and I. And I just remember, him saying, thanks for letting us know you made it back to my house. And then he just was saying, and I hope that you find somewhere to go to church this morning. Mind you, like I said, my dad doesn't normally text me on Sunday mornings. And so for him to say that, I was like, well, now I have to find somewhere, And I was already planning on it. But, when you get out of the rhythm and out of the routine of going to church and just doing online church, sometimes it is really difficult to take the step to get out of your house and to go physically to a church because you think, I can get the same stuff from my living room on the TV, even though you can't get that community. You can't get the friendships. You can't have that social time, that fellowship from your living room. And so this was kind of, my moment of, okay, I want to go to that church in Jerome, but I can't remember the name of it. Don't want to bug my dad, but I'm going to bug him anyway. And so I texted him. I was like, can you remind me the name of Kevin and Brandy's church? Because I forgot. And so the first thing that he did was immediately he texted me back. Again, Sunday morning, whatever, but he immediately texted me back. He said, Life Church at the Magic Valley with a big exclamation point. And I was like, okay, and I was like, okay, well, the church is at 10:30, like it's 30 minutes, trying to map it out in my head because I'm still laying in bed texting my dad and I need to get up and get ready for church if I'm going to go. And I just remember over the last year, my biggest prayer was, God, I just want to find a place that you can welcome me with open arms. I feel welcomed with open arms, Lord. I don't want to feel like I can walk in, sit through a church service, and leave without anybody speaking to me. That's not what I want for, myself. And, I want to be able to be in a place where I can help and I can serve. And if nobody's going to talk to me, how am I going to be able to serve unless I'm, butting into their conversations, And every week I would pray that, I just want to be welcomed with open arms. And so, I finally got up and I ended up, coming on December 29th, the last Sunday of the year. And when Brandy saw me, the first thing she did was open up her arms, give me a huge hug and say, oh my gosh, I have not seen you in forever, and gave me the biggest hug ever. And I was like, okay, God, I see you. I didn't realize that I was needing such a physical reminder of where I needed to be. I was just thinking theoretically, being friendly and all these things, but no. She literally opened her arms and gave me a big giant hug, which is not necessarily I'm a hugger usually, but not when I haven't seen somebody in so long. I'm like, oh, hi, but no, it was God had given me this big, bright sign that I had been asking for. And I didn't realize it needed to be that literal hug. And in that moment, I knew I was home. And I hadn't even stepped foot in the sanctuary. I hadn't met a single soul besides seeing Kevin and Brandy. And Brandy had told me that my dad had texted Pastor Kevin that morning and was like, hey, my daughter might, come visit. And later I texted him how dare you rat me out like that? But he was like, no, I was just trying to give him a heads up. You're my daughter. And I would, assume that was, something he would do for me. And I was like, okay. So even from 140-ish miles away, my dad's still trying to take care of me. Yes, I'm an adult and he has a church to run and he does great, but he's still looking out for me. And so there were lots of times where I just wasn't sure if I was supposed to be in Twin Falls, if I was supposed to, move back to Boise. I now had a 1-year-old sister, or I had a baby sister, at the time, and I was considering that. But God still had a plan for me here. I just wasn't quite sure where I needed to be at the time. And so I don't share this story with you as a sob story by any means. It's kind of my way of, telling you a little bit about myself, getting into it, because I know I get a chance to talk to you, some people sometimes, but I don't get to dive deep sometimes. But like I said, it would be a little bit different this morning. And that's okay. Sometimes church can be a little out of the norm. And let me just say that the constant thing that I tried to uphold in going to foster care and dealing with my sister and dealing with my biological mom and all of these changes in my life was I always kept my quiet time. And I always took time to just be still and understand that no matter what I have going on in my life, it will work out and it will be okay. And I know that with these journals, sometimes I reread them and I relive the sorrows because I like doing that to myself apparently, but I also relive the victories. And that's one of my favorite things about that, is knowing that I had no idea what my plan for my own life was or what I thought I needed to do or where I needed to go. And then I see just how far I've come. And I know a lot of people have probably heard of, Jeremiah 29:11. Don't get me wrong, that is a great verse. Great chapter, great verse. But not very many people read further than that. A lot of people just stop with, he knows the plans, but we have to kind of take some action. So in Jeremiah 29, verse 11 through 13, it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in a future." Like I said, that's where normally people stop. But if you read on, it says, "Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart." Church, we have to seek him. No matter what situation we have in our lives that are going on, you have to be the one to take the step towards him. He'll always be there, but you have to choose to walk through the doors that he's opening for you. If you're just going to sit there and let things come to you, let me just tell you, you're not going to live a very fruitful life. When you sit there, you call on him, you seek him, then he will come to you. If you knock on that door, he's going to answer it. He will listen to us when we pray. Even if that praying happens to be in a journal. It doesn't matter if it's verbally or if it's, written or if it's some other type of way. When we seek him with our whole hearts, friends, he's there. There's no time lapse. There's no delay. He is right there. But we can't do it half-heartedly. We have to seek him with our whole hearts. So I don't know how many of you have your quiet times. You have regularly scheduled times, but I am going to encourage you and challenge you this week. Make time. Even if your life is busy, cut out 10 minutes of Facebook or 10 minutes of the show that you watch. It doesn't have to be a lot. But he is worth, honestly, more than 10 minutes, but he is worth at least that much. He is worth you making time for him every single day, no matter what it is. And I think that in the world that we live in today, with how crazy it is, we need more prayer, not less. We need more time with Jesus and not less. Friends, he listens to us in that quiet time. And sometimes we need to understand what his calling on our lives are. We don't know what we're called to because we don't take time to listen. We talk, but we don't sit there and actually try to listen. And so it starts in the quiet, friends. I am just so grateful of the family that I have, the opportunities that I've gotten, and this amazing church that I get to call home. I have had probably one of the busiest years of my life, in the last, I don't remember how many years, but it has been filled with such amazing things, such amazing friendships blossoming, and a whole bunch of opportunities that I never thought. And I'm very grateful, and I'm very blessed that I have spent the time to really seek what God has for me, because otherwise 100% I would have moved back to Boise and I would have missed out on, helping build this church, helping, reach people of the Magic Valley and in Jerome, Idaho specifically, because the Lord has big plans for our church, friends, and I know that it's going to be radical. I fully believe, again, I don't know the plans. I know He does, but I do have faith. And I know that I pray for our church often, and I just know that it is going to be an amazing thing. So friends, let's pray, and then I will let you get out of here. Father, thank you so much for leading us through all of the valleys of our lives and celebrating with us through our victories. Lord, I thank you so much for this church family that you have given me, which has become my home away from home. Would you let everyone who steps foot in here feel loved and welcomed into your house? Lord, would you speak to us when we seek you? Lord, when we call on you, would you let our quiet time be a very intimate time between us and you? Father, you listen to us, and we are thankful for that. Lord, would you put your angels of protection around each and every family that is represented here today? And would you bring them back safely next week, ready to just hear what you have for us? Lord, we love you and we praise you, and we pray all this in your mighty and precious name. Amen.